You're not coming on this trip." That was the whole message from my daughter at 6:12 a.m., sitting on my screen like a finger pressed against my mouth. No good morning, no explanation beyond a second line that arrived a minute later. "It's more of a young people thing, Mom. We'll bring you something from the duty-free." I stared at those words, breathed in through my nose, and felt something steady click into place, the way a stubborn jar lid finally gives. I am 74. My knees dislike stairs, and my hands prefer cups with handles. I also know how to book a ticket, how to pack for 4 days without checking a bag, and how to show up where people think I won't. I put the phone face down and put the kettle on. The house was still. The refrigerator sighed, the finch outside scolded. The kettle thought about boiling. On the counter lay the folder where I keep what I call my travel bones. Passport, Medicare card, a photocopy of my prescriptions, and the little list that says turn down the thermostat, water the fern, stop the paper. I texted my neighbor, May. "Could you feed Fern?" 4 days. May's reply came quick. "Of course." "You okay?" "Better than yesterday," I wrote, and it was true. I balanced a mug under the kettle's whistle, opened my laptop, and logged into the airline account some people think an old woman can't possibly manage. Miles are just patience that grew legs. I had enough for a one-way, not to their resort. I didn't need to sit at a table where my chair had been preempted by the idea of my age. I chose a city down the coast. Same departure time, different gate. Salt air, flat sidewalks, a boardwalk where a person can move at her own pace and not apologize for it. Before I bought anything, I called the airline. "Passenger assistance for Agnes Markham. Flight today. Morning departure," I said. "I'll need wheelchair assistance from security to gate. Left knee." I do better when I state the need cleanly. People are kinder when they have a job they can perform. The woman on the line was brisk and warm. "Noted, Ms. Markham. You'll see an attendant at the checkpoint." I thanked her and paid with miles and $10. The printer coughed out a boarding pass that looked like possibility. I packed a small backpack, 3 cotton dresses that don't wrinkle much, sandals, my cardigan with the mended cuff, a pill organizer, a paperback I've read twice but don't mind reading again, cash for tips, a plain envelope with 2 house keys on a ring, and a letter, 3 pages, written in the good pen, folded once. I slipped it into the front pocket. It wasn't a manifesto. It was inventory and boundary. What I've paid for, what I won't pay for again, what I need in order to be treated as a mother and not a wallet with weak knees. At 8:30, I called my bank. "Travel notice," I said. "Yes, same card. One additional request. Please remove the family authorization for rideshare charges, ending 2274. My grandson Luke had attached his account to mine last year, only for emergencies, Grandma. And somehow, every late-night burger and surge-priced ride home from the gym had begun to count as an emergency. The clerk clicked keys. Done. I thanked her and put the card back into the slot in my wallet where it lives beside my grocery list. Nora texted again at 9. "Don't be upset. This is supposed to be relaxing." I typed and erased, then settled on. "I hope you are." I could feel the space that answer made, wide and cool. Upset used to buy me invitations I had to pay for later. Calm buys me a chair by a window and my own plans. The ride to the airport was ordinary. Light traffic, a driver who hummed to the radio, the city shrugging into Friday. At the curb, a young attendant in a neon vest rolled a wheelchair toward me and looked past my shoulder, the way people do when they expect an escort to appear. "It's just me," I said. I walk fine, but slowly. If we could save the knee for the long hallways, I'd be grateful. He nodded, didn't fuss, and we moved at my speed. Security smelled like coffee and rubber mats. I took out my bag of liquids, my laptop, my pride. The agent was polite. I sat to put my shoes back on. The left heel takes longer. The attendant waited without shifting from foot to foot. We threaded past vacation shirts and rolling suitcases to the concourse, where gates open off a bright spine like rooms off a generous house. Their gate was 23. Mine would be 11. I asked him to stop before 23. 1 minute, I said. Families collect at gates like tide pools, colorful, noisy, alive with tiny dramas. I saw them before they saw me. My daughter in a white linen shirt she'd call effortless. Her husband, Owen, already scanning for upgrades. Luke in headphones, bouncing one heel. They were close enough to recognize the sweater I'd given Nora last Christmas, far enough not to feel my breath. I didn't wave. Not yet. I reached into the backpack, touched paper and keys, and felt the jar lid in me turn again, smoother this time. I was here to say goodbye to the version of me they had agreed on. The flight numbers flickered above us. Somewhere, a child laughed. I lifted my hand. The taxi's hum was low and constant, like the sound inside a seashell. I sat back, one hand over the small backpack, watching the city flatten toward the airport. Outside the window, strip malls gave way to warehouses, then the pale arcs of parking decks. The driver asked if I was meeting family. Something like that, I said, and left it there. Inside the terminal, the air smelled of coffee and disinfectant. My wheelchair attendant, a tall young man with a shaved head and a calm voice, met me at the curb. "Morning, Ms. Markham, gate 11? "Yes," I said, "but let's make a short stop first." I gave him the number. He didn't ask why. Professionalism can be the best kind of kindness. We rolled toward the check-in counters. I stopped at the airline desk, sliding my passport forward. "I believe my daughter and her family are on the 9:45 to Monterey," I said. The agent tapped her keyboard. "They are. Would you like to be seated with them?" "No," I said evenly. "Just confirm they're checked in." A flicker of surprise in her eyes, then she nodded. "Yes, ma'am." All present. I thanked her, then took out my own boarding pass. Same departure time, different gate. At security, we moved slowly, my knee reminding me why I'd asked for help in the first place. Shoes off, laptop out, liquids in their little bag. I kept my letter and keys in the backpack pocket, close to my lap. The metal detector chirped at my bracelet. The agent waved me through anyway. Past the checkpoint, the concourse opened wide and bright, lined with shops selling things nobody needs before a flight. Sequined neck pillows, overpriced headphones, plastic tubs of caramel corn. Gate 23 came into view, white numbers against blue, and the sight of them sent a thin current through my chest. There they were. Nora leaned against a pillar, scrolling her phone. Owen stood with his back to her, talking to Luke, who had one earbud dangling. Their carry-ons were tidy, matching. Even their leisure was coordinated. "Would you like to stop?" my attendant asked. "Yes," I said. "Right here." We parked by a planter of artificial palms. I could see without being seen. Luke laughed at something Owen said, the sound carrying over the crowd. Nora slipped her phone into her bag, checking her boarding pass. They were efficient, prepared, entirely without me. I opened the envelope, checking the contents by touch. 2 keys, cool against the paper, and the folded letter. My handwriting on the front. For Nora and Owen. I closed it, slid it back, and rested my hands on the armrests. I wasn't here to plead for a seat at their table. I was here to deliver a truth I had carried too long, then turn and walk toward a gate where my name was already on the manifest. "Ready to head to your gate?" the attendant asked after a moment. "In a minute," I said. I wanted to memorize the scene. Nora brushing hair from her face, Owen shifting his weight, Luke tapping his phone. This was what exclusion looked like in daylight. Not shouting, not slammed doors, just the smooth absence of a place for you. Finally, I nodded, and we turned toward Gate 11. The walk felt longer than it should have, but each yard put more air in my lungs. At my gate, I tipped the attendant, thanked him, and settled into a seat by the window. Across the tarmac, I could see their jet at 23 being prepped, belly open, suitcases on a belt. I pulled out my phone and sent May a short message. "At the airport, all as expected." Her reply came back almost instantly. "Proud of you." I put the phone away. The glass reflected a thin, determined face I still recognized. The boarding announcement for my flight was 20 minutes off. Plenty of time to sit with the fact that I was exactly where I had chosen to be. Not behind their gate, waiting for crumbs, but in front of mine, holding the ticket I had bought myself. And in my bag, an envelope that would land in their hands before their plane left the ground. Boarding for their flight was called first. I watched the stream of passengers rise, herd themselves toward Gate 23, and vanish behind the scanner's beep. Nora went first, boarding pass in hand, her carry-on gliding behind her like a well-trained pet. Owen followed, his free arms slung over Luke's shoulders. Luke glanced back once, not toward me, but toward the windows, as if looking for something outside. Then they were gone. I waited a few minutes before moving. The letter was still in my bag. My plan was simple. I rolled toward their gate, empty now, except for the agent tidying the counter. "Excuse me," I said, holding up the envelope. "This needs to get to passengers Markham. Row." I gave her their row number. I'd memorized it at check-in. "Could you hand this to them once they're seated?" She hesitated, scanning my face, then nodded. "Of course, ma'am." I thanked her and left without looking back. Some deliveries are better made without witness. Back at Gate 11, boarding had begun. My attendant from earlier had returned, as if he'd known I'd need him. "San Luis Obispo, right?" "Yes," I said. "And could we take it slow?" He smiled. "We've got time." Inside the plane, the aisle felt narrower than it used to, or maybe my shoulders had learned to claim more space. My seat was by the window, 3 rows from the front. The air smelled faintly of fuel and lemon cleaner. A young woman in the aisle seat stood to let me in, her paperback held open in one hand. "Take your time," she said, and I did. As we taxied out, I glanced toward the other side of the terminal. Their jet was still at the gate, jet bridge pulled back, cabin door sealed. I imagined the agent walking down the aisle, finding Nora or Owen, offering the envelope. I wondered if they'd open it right there or wait until the seatbelt sign went off. The letter wasn't long, 3 pages, but it was dense. Every sentence had been weighed, pared down, polished like a stone. No accusations, no theatrics, just an accounting. What I'd given, what I wouldn't give again, what I needed in order to stay in their lives with dignity intact. We lifted off into a clear sky. I pressed my palm against the cold oval of the window, watching the city flatten, the roads becoming lines, the water a sheet of brushed steel. My chest loosened, the way it does when you've crossed a border you can't uncross. The flight was short. The descent into San Luis Obispo was gentle, the hills rolling out like a green quilt. At baggage claim, though I had no checked bag, I saw my name on a cardboard sign held by a driver in a navy windbreaker. "Ms. Markham, May booked you with me," he said. His car smelled of eucalyptus. The ride to the small apartment I'd rented took 15 minutes. The keys were in a lockbox, the code already in my phone. Inside, it was quiet. A kitchenette with 2 mugs, a bed with a plain white coverlet, a sliding door that opened to a balcony no bigger than a welcome mat. Beyond it, the ocean was a dark line under the afternoon light. I sat on the edge of the bed, shoes still on, and felt the weight of the day settle, not heavy, just definite. My phone buzzed. One new message from Nora. I didn't open it. Not yet. Some things deserve to wait until the kettle's boiled and your feet are out of your shoes. The apartment's quiet was a kind I hadn't heard in years. No refrigerator humming too loud, no footsteps overhead, no television blaring from someone else's room. Just the slow, steady rush of the ocean outside and the faint creak of the building adjusting in the sun. I slipped off my shoes, lined them neatly by the sliding door, and filled the little kettle with tap water. The message from Nora still sat on my phone screen, unopened. The subject line, if you could call it that, was just, "Mom." Nothing else. I set the phone face down on the counter. Boiling water first. Decisions later. While the kettle heated, I opened the single cupboard above the sink. 2 mugs, both plain white, stacked like twins. I chose one, rinsed it, dropped in a tea bag from my own supply. Some things I don't leave to chance. Tea is one of them. When I finally picked up the phone, I didn't swipe right away. I took a sip, let the steam fog my glasses, then slid my thumb across the glass. "Mom, I don't know what you're trying to prove. Owen says I should ignore you until you calm down, but I can't. I read your letter. I didn't know you felt that way. I don't agree with everything, but I'm sorry. I don't want to fight. Can we talk when we're back?" I read it twice. There was no apology for the text that morning, no acknowledgement of telling me I wasn't coming. Just a general regret, padded with qualifiers. I set the phone down again. Sometimes the first answer you give to someone is silence. By late afternoon, I'd unpacked the dresses, hung them on the short rod in the closet, and tucked my sandals underneath. I put my cardigan over the single chair in the corner, the one that looked toward the sliding door. Outside, the breeze had picked up, carrying the smell of salt and something faintly metallic. Gulls looped against the pale sky, their cries cutting through the air like threads snapping. I took my tea to the balcony. The rail was low, the paint chipped, but from here I could see the boardwalk curling along the shore. A couple walked by below, he with a camera around his neck, she with a scarf knotted at her throat. They moved in easy rhythm, their hands brushing every few steps. I realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd walked like that with anyone. The phone buzzed again. This time, a call from May. "You there safe?" she asked when I answered. "Yes," I said. "And the apartment's fine. Small, but fine." She hesitated. "Nora's been calling me. Wants to know why you'd go to the airport if you weren't invited." I laughed, not bitter, just short. Because I had something to deliver, and I did. We talked about the weather, about her neighbor's new dog, about nothing that needed fixing. After we hung up, I stayed on the balcony until the air cooled enough to raise goosebumps. Evening came slow. I made a simple supper, bread from the bakery on the corner, cheese, a sliced pear. I ate at the little table without a television, or another voice filling the room. Just me, my thoughts, and the occasional creak of the building. Before bed, I checked my phone one last time. 2 missed calls from Nora, one from Owen, and a text from Luke. "Grandma, I don't know what's going on, but I hope you're okay." That one I answered. "I'm fine, Luke. Enjoy your trip." No explanations. He didn't need them yet. I brushed my teeth, folded back the bedspread, and lay down. The sheets were cool, smelling faintly of detergent and sun. Outside, the ocean kept breathing, steady and indifferent. I thought about the gate, the envelope, the look on their faces I would never see. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was waiting for anyone to understand me. Morning would come with its own tide of calls, apologies, or accusations. But tonight, there was just the sound of water and the space I'd made for myself. I woke before the sun, the way I often do, with no alarm but the quiet insistence of my own thoughts. The apartment was still shadowed, the sky a pale gray beyond the balcony. I wrapped my cardigan around me and slid the door open. The ocean was there, as it had been last night, only softer now, no glare. Just the gentle pull and retreat of water on sand. A jogger passed below, her breath clouding in the cool air. Somewhere farther down the boardwalk, someone was whistling, the tune too faint to place. I stood there for a long moment, hands wrapped around a mug of tea, thinking about how small the world felt when you stripped it down to what you could see, hear, and touch. The phone was on the counter where I'd left it. One new message, Nora, again. This time, "Mom, can you at least tell me you're okay?" Luke's worried. No Owen's name in this one. I typed back, "I'm safe." "Tell Luke I said hello." I didn't add anything else. There's a kind of power in brevity. After breakfast, oatmeal made on the tiny stove, half a banana sliced in, I decided to explore. My knee wasn't thrilled about the idea, but I promised it we'd take breaks. The boardwalk was busier now. Families with strollers, teenagers with skateboards, retirees in sun hats. No one knew me here, and the anonymity was a balm. I walked to the end where the pier jutted out into the water. At the very tip, a man sat with a fishing rod, a cooler beside him. "Morning," he said without looking up. I returned it, watching his line sway in the light breeze. It reminded me of my late husband, Frank, who used to swear he could tell the kind of fish by the way the line moved. I stayed there until the smell of salt grew sharper and the sun began to warm my shoulders. On the way back, I stopped at a small grocery, bought a loaf of bread, a jar of local honey, and a small bunch of daisies for the table. The woman at the register rang me up with the kind of cheerfulness that doesn't demand a return in kind. "Enjoy your day," she said. I planned to. Back in the apartment, I put the daisies in the only vase I could find, a rinsed glass juice bottle, and set them in the center of the table. Their presence made the place feel claimed, not mine forever, but mine for now. The afternoon passed in small comforts, reading on the balcony, making another pot of tea, writing a postcard to May with a picture of the pier. I didn't mention Nora or the letter. Some things are better kept between your own mind and the ocean. Around 4, the phone rang. "Luke." "Grandma? It's me. I'm using the hotel Wi-Fi. Mom doesn't know I'm calling." His voice was low, like he was hiding in a hallway. "I just wanted to check you're really okay. Mom's, well, she's kinda mad." I smiled at the ceiling. "I'm fine, Luke. I'm on vacation." "Without us?" he asked. I could hear the confusion more than hurt. "Yes," I said. "Sometimes people need to take trips on their own." He was quiet for a moment. "Will you tell me about it when you get back?" "Of course." We said goodbye, and I sat there with the phone in my lap, thinking about how easily honesty passes between some people and how hard others make it. Evening came with a sky that looked like brushed copper. I made toast with the bread and honey, ate it standing at the balcony rail, and listened to the low thrum of conversation from people passing below. No one was asking me for anything. No one was deciding for me. When I finally closed the door against the night air, I realized I hadn't thought about the gate or the envelope all day. That absence felt like its own kind of gift. Tomorrow, I decided, I'd take the bus to the old mission outside town. Alone, on purpose, because I could. The morning bus to the mission rattled like an old sewing machine, every joint and bolt speaking its mind. I chose a seat halfway back, where I could see out both sides. The driver was a wiry man with a sun-creased face, humming along to a country station on the radio. A handful of other passengers rode in silence. 2 young women in hiking boots, a man with paint on his hands, an elderly couple who held hands without looking at each other. The ride wound through the edges of town, past pastel houses with peeling trim, then out toward low hills that seemed to breathe under the morning fog. My knee complained a little with each bump, but I shifted in my seat and let the movement rock me. The mission stood on a rise, its adobe walls warm in the early sun. A volunteer in a wide-brimmed hat greeted visitors at the entrance, offering a brochure and a quiet smile. "Self-guided," she said. That suited me. I moved through the cool corridors slowly, touching the smooth plaster where hundreds of hands had passed before mine. In the courtyard, a fountain trickled into a stone basin, the sound mingling with the soft rustle of the pepper trees overhead. I sat on a bench, feeling the sun reach my shoulders, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel the need to hurry anywhere. A group came through, a family, by the look of them. Parents, 2 children, a grandmother trailing a step behind. The woman, my age, maybe a little older, caught my eye and smiled, a flash of recognition passing between us. She walked at her own pace. They waited. No one urged her along. I stayed at the mission until midday, reading plaques, watching sparrows flit between the roof tiles, letting the quiet work on me. On the bus back, I sat in the same seat, my bag resting against my knees. Somewhere in town, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Owen. "We need to discuss what you did at the airport. That was uncalled for." I read it twice, then deleted it without replying. Discussions that begin with an accusation tend to end with more of the same. Back at the apartment, I made a late lunch, bread, cheese, the last of the pear slices, and ate with the sliding door open. The ocean had shifted to a deeper blue, the waves rougher now, flecked with white. I spent the afternoon walking the boardwalk again, this time without a destination. At a small stall, I bought a cup of clam chowder and ate it standing up, watching a surfer wipe out and pop up, laughing. People around me were busy with their own stories, none of which required my intervention or my money. In the evening, May called. "You sound lighter," she said. "I feel lighter," I admitted. She hesitated. "Nora's been calling me again. She says Luke told her you're fine, but she doesn't believe it. She wants me to convince you to talk to her." I sipped my tea. "May, I'm not refusing to talk. I'm choosing when and how." That's different. We said goodnight, and I watched the sky darken from pale gold to slate. The lights along the boardwalk flickered on, strings of them tracing the curve of the shore. Somewhere down there, couples strolled. Kids begged for ice cream, and the world went on without my name in anyone's mouth. Before bed, I wrote a few lines in my notebook, something I'd neglected for years. It isn't that they forgot me. It's that they replaced the version of me they could see with one that was easier to manage. I am not here to fit their picture frame. I closed the book, turned off the lamp, and let the ocean's rhythm carry me toward sleep. Tomorrow, I decided, I'd go to the farmer's market. I wanted fresh peaches, even if they bruised on the way home. The farmer's market was set up in a long strip along Main Street, each stall a bright pocket of color against the pale morning. I arrived just after it opened, before the real crowd came. The air smelled of cut herbs, fresh bread, and the faint tang of the sea that the inland breeze carried with it. Vendors called out soft greetings as I walked past, no one insisting, just offering. I stopped at a table stacked high with peaches, their skins flushed and downy. The farmer, a woman about my age with sunburned forearms, handed me one to try. The juice ran down my wrist as I bit in. "Sweet enough?" she asked. I nodded, bought 3, and wrapped them carefully in the cloth bag I'd brought from home. At another stall, I picked up a jar of orange marmalade, thinking of how Frank used to spread it thick on toast, leaving the spoon sticky on the counter. Little memories like that come now without the heavy pull they used to have. They arrive, sit with me for a moment, then go. I bought a bunch of small carrots, a loaf of dark bread, and a paper cup of coffee. Sitting on a bench at the end of the market, I watched the stream of people, families negotiating over donuts, couples holding hands, a man balancing a toddler on his shoulders. It struck me that not a single one of them knew who I was or what I'd done at an airport gate 3 days ago. There was a kind of peace in that anonymity. Back at the apartment, I arranged my purchases on the small counter, their colors a little celebration. I sliced one of the peaches over a bowl, poured yogurt on top, and ate it standing by the open door. The phone buzzed. A message from Nora. "Mom, I'm serious. You can't just cut us off. We need to talk, please." The please was new, but the tone still had the edge of command. I put the phone down without answering. Not out of spite, but because I knew she wasn't ready to listen, only to react. In the afternoon, I took my book down to the shore. I sat on a low bench, waves rolling in and out in a rhythm older than anything between me and my daughter. A boy about 6 wandered over, his hands full of shells. "You can have one," he said solemnly, offering me a white spiral. "Thank you," I said, taking it. His mother called him back, and he ran off without looking back. The shell sat warm in my palm for a while before I slipped it into my pocket. As the light softened toward evening, I walked to a small cafe I'd passed earlier in the week. The owner, a man with silver hair and a patient way of speaking, brought me a bowl of vegetable soup and a slice of bread without asking if I wanted the bread toasted. It came warm, the butter just beginning to melt. Halfway through the meal, my phone rang. Luke again. "Hi, Grandma. We're leaving tomorrow. Mom's still upset, but I think she misses you." His voice held no agenda, only curiosity. "I'm fine, Luke," I said. "And I miss you too. We'll talk when you're home." After dinner, I walked slowly back along the boardwalk, the shell still in my pocket, the lights above me swaying slightly in the breeze. I realized I hadn't once thought about what they might be doing tonight, whether they were packing or dining out or pretending not to think about me. When I reached the apartment, I placed the shell on the table next to the vase of daisies. A small token of the day, a reminder that even strangers can see you without asking you to be less. I made tea, turned off the main light, and sat in the chair by the door. listening to the ocean in the dark. Tomorrow, they would be back in their own city, and I would still be here, on my own time. That thought no longer felt like an absence. It felt like a choice. Their flight home was scheduled for mid-morning. I knew because I'd looked it up, not out of longing, but because I like to have my facts straight. At 9:12, my phone buzzed with a single-line text from Nora. "We've landed." No questions, no punctuation beyond the period. I read it, set the phone down, and went back to buttering my toast. The day was already bright. The sky a flat blue that made the ocean glare. I'd planned to spend it at the small library I'd noticed 2 streets back from the shore. It was in an old brick building, the kind where the floorboards creak like they're greeting you. The librarian, a woman with white hair coiled in a braid, gave me a nod as I came in. No form to fill out, no questions, just the quiet assumption that I belonged there. I chose a table near the window and browsed the shelves until I found a book of short stories. I read for hours, looking up now and then to watch the sunlight shift across the spines. At noon, I walked out into the warmth and bought a sandwich from a corner deli, egg salad on rye, the kind you have to eat carefully. When I returned to the apartment, there were 3 missed calls from Nora and 1 from Owen. No voicemails. I made tea, sat at the small table, and ignored them for now. You don't have to open every door just because someone knocks. Late in the afternoon, Luke called. "We're home," he said. "Mom's in a mood." He didn't elaborate, and I didn't ask. "How was your trip?" I asked instead. He told me about a boat ride they'd taken, the dolphins they'd seen, how the water had sprayed over the bow. I listened, asked questions, and let him talk until he seemed lighter. "Will I see you soon?" he asked. "Yes," I said, "but we'll plan it differently next time." He didn't ask what I meant. After the call, I walked down to the water. The tide was coming in, the waves breaking closer to shore. I rolled my pants up to the knee and stood where the foam could reach my ankles. The water was colder than I expected, a clean shock that made me breathe deeper. A couple nearby was taking turns photographing each other against the sunset. I offered to take one of them together, and they handed me their phone without hesitation. I framed the shot, made sure the horizon was straight, and handed it back. "Perfect," the woman said. I smiled, knowing that they'd have a memory of this place with my invisible hand behind it. Back in the apartment, I made a simple dinner: carrots from the market, roasted until their edges caramelized, and a slice of the dark bread. The daisies on the table were starting to droop, petals curling in on themselves. I didn't mind. Things are allowed to fade. That night, as I wrote in my notebook, I noted the difference between absence and emptiness. Absence can be a space you fill with your own choice of color, shape, sound. Emptiness is when someone else has taken the space from you. I was learning to keep the difference clear. Before bed, I checked my phone one last time. A new message from Nora. "We need to meet. Soon." I put the phone face down on the table. Not tonight. Tonight was for the ocean's steady breath, the cool sheets, and the fact that I could wake tomorrow without an agenda but my own. The morning was overcast, the kind of sky that makes the sea look heavier. I took my tea to the balcony and watched the waves drag themselves in, flatten, and slide back. The air smelled faintly of rain. I thought about Nora's last message. "We need to meet. Soon." And decided that soon would be on my terms, not hers. After breakfast, I walked to a small art gallery I'd passed several times but never entered. Inside, the air was cool and still. The walls held paintings of the coast in every mood. Storm-gray mornings, gold-smeared sunsets, moonlit tides. One painting stopped me. A single empty chair on the sand, facing the horizon. No footprints around it. No figure approaching. I stood there longer than I meant to. The gallery attendant, a man with round glasses and paint on his knuckles, asked if I was visiting. "Yes," I said. "On vacation." He nodded like he understood the weight of the word. I left without buying anything, but the image of that empty chair followed me down the street. By midday, the first drops of rain began. I ducked into a cafe for shelter, ordering coffee and a slice of lemon cake. The table by the window was perfect for watching people hurry by under umbrellas. A young couple argued softly over a map. Two elderly men played chess without speaking. I felt no urgency to leave. Back at the apartment, I found 2 more messages from Nora and one from Owen. His was short. "We're coming by this weekend. Please be home." I read it twice. The assumption, the unspoken, "whether you like it or not," was so familiar it was almost boring. I set the phone aside and opened my notebook. When they come, I will decide where we meet. I will not have them walk into my space as if it belongs to them. I spent the rainy afternoon reading and slicing the last peach from the market over yogurt. The rain turned the ocean a deeper slate, and gulls wheeled low over the shore. In the evening, May called. "You sound settled," she said. "I am," I told her. She lowered her voice. "Nora's fishing for information through me. Wants to know when you're coming back." "Tell her I'll let her know when I'm ready," I said. May chuckled. "She's not used to you holding the reins." That night, the rain eased, but left the air cool enough for a cardigan. I walked down to the boardwalk, the wooden planks damp under my sandals. Few people were out, just the sound of the waves and the faint creak of the pier. I leaned on the railing, looking out into the dark water. Somewhere far down the coast, they were back to their routines. Somewhere up ahead, a conversation waited, but it no longer felt like something I had to rush toward. When I returned, I put the kettle on and thought again about the painting. The empty chair, the wide horizon. It didn't look lonely to me anymore. It looked ready. Before bed, I texted May. "If they ask again, tell them I'll meet them after I'm home. Not before." It felt good to set it down in words, like planting a stake in the sand that the tide couldn't quite reach. I fell asleep with the balcony door cracked open, listening to the waves pull at the shore. In the morning, I'd decide whether to walk the beach or take the bus inland. My days belonged to me now, and that was the point. The morning light broke through in thin streaks, as if the sky had been stitched and the seams were coming apart. I made tea and drank it on the balcony, the air cool against my face. The sea was calm again, no trace of yesterday's rain. It struck me how quickly it could shift moods without apology. After breakfast, I decided to take the inland bus I'd thought about the night before. It wound through small streets lined with eucalyptus and bougainvillea, then into open fields dotted with grazing cattle. The air smelled faintly of hay and earth, a welcome change from the salt-heavy breeze of the coast. My stop was a small town with a main street barely 3 blocks long. There was a bakery with its door propped open, letting out the smell of warm bread. I bought a cinnamon roll, still sticky with icing, and ate it at a table outside while watching the slow rhythm of the place. Shopkeepers sweeping sidewalks, a boy on a bike delivering newspapers, 2 dogs ambling across the road without hurry. In a thrift store, I found a silk scarf the color of deep water. The fabric was soft, worn in just enough to feel like it remembered every hand that had held it. I bought it for $3 and tucked it into my bag. Back at the coast by mid-afternoon, I walked along the beach, letting the water soak the cuffs of my pants. A sandpiper darted ahead of me, leaving a scatter of prints in the wet sand before flying off. I thought of Luke, how he'd once run along a similar shoreline, daring the waves to catch him. When I returned to the apartment, there was another message from Nora. "We're serious about coming by this weekend. We can't keep going like this." I read it standing in the doorway, the light behind me stretching my shadow into the room. She didn't say whose we she meant. Her and Owen, her and Luke, or her and the version of me she was trying to summon back. I boiled water for tea and sat at the small table. The daisies in the vase were nearly done, petals browning at the edges, stems bending. I let them be. Not everything needs reviving. Later, I took my notebook to the balcony and wrote, "They speak as if peace can only come from my compliance. But I have found another kind of peace, the one that comes from knowing you can leave the room and still be whole." May called, just before sunset. "I told them you'd see them when you're ready," she said. "You should have heard the silence on the line." I smiled. Sometimes silence is the first step toward hearing. That night, I made soup from the carrots I had left, stirring slowly, tasting often. The scent filled the apartment, warm and grounding. Outside, the boardwalk lights blinked on one by one. I ate with the sliding door open, letting the sound of the waves come in like another guest at the table. Before bed, I draped the new scarf over the back of the chair. Its deep blue caught the lamplight, a reminder that I could still choose beauty for no reason other than wanting it. I thought of the weekend ahead, not with dread, but with a kind of curiosity. They would expect me to be waiting. I would be ready, but not in the way they imagined. The weekend arrived with a brightness that felt almost deliberate, as if the weather wanted to make a point. I was up early, walking the shoreline while the sand was still cool. The waves were small, breaking neatly, the kind of sea that makes you think nothing dangerous could ever happen. But I knew better. Smooth waters can turn rough without warning. I'd already decided that I wouldn't be at the apartment when they came. Nora's last message had made it clear they planned to drop by unannounced. The phrase itself was a trespass. So after breakfast, I packed a small bag, book, water, a sandwich wrapped in wax paper, and my notebook. I tied the deep blue scarf loosely around my neck and left the daisies on the table just as they were, slightly wilted, leaning toward each other. The bus inland was nearly empty, just me and a man in work boots who nodded once in greeting. I got off at a park I'd seen on the map, a wide stretch of grass bordered by oak trees. The air smelled of sun-warmed leaves. I found a bench under one of the oaks and settled in with my book. Around midday, May called. "They're at your place," she said without preamble. I could hear her TV in the background, the sound of some game show host laughing. Knocked, waited, knocked again. "I told them you'd gone out." I could picture Owen's jaw tightening, Nora scanning the street, Luke shifting uncomfortably. "Did they say anything?" I asked. "Just that they'd be back. You want me to keep playing messenger?" "Only if you want to," I said. "But you can also tell them I'm fine. That's all they need to know today." After we hung up, I took out my notebook and wrote, "If they expect me to be in the same place they left me, they haven't been paying attention. My life is not a waiting room." I stayed in the park for hours, watching the shadows lengthen across the grass. Children played tag near the fountain, their shouts carrying through the warm air. No one there knew anything about my airport morning, my letter, or the messages that stacked up like unpaid bills. They only knew me as the woman on the bench with a blue scarf and a quiet face. By late afternoon, I was ready to head back. The apartment was as I'd left it, the air still holding the faint scent of the carrot soup from 2 nights ago. On the table, a folded note. "Mom, we came by. Call us. N." I placed it under the vase, weighing it down with the seashell the boy had given me on the boardwalk. I made tea, sitting by the open door while the light shifted toward gold. My phone buzzed. Luke. "Grandma, we came to see you," he said. "I know," I answered. "May told me." He hesitated. "Why weren't you home?" I thought about how to answer, then said, "Because I was somewhere else I wanted to be." Silence stretched for a moment. Then he said, "Okay." No judgment, no push, just okay. When we hung up, I watched the horizon darken, the ocean and sky blending into a single deep tone. I imagined Nora's face when she realized I wasn't going to follow her timetable anymore. She might call it avoidance. I called it preparation. That night, I cooked a small dinner, bread, cheese, a few of the carrots left over. As I ate, I thought about how much calmer the apartment felt without the sense of someone about to knock. I wrote one last line before bed. Boundaries aren't walls. They're doors I choose when to open. The scarf hung over the chair again, a silent witness to the day I didn't spend waiting. And somewhere in town, my daughter was probably rewriting the story to make herself the one left behind. Let her. I was already living the next chapter. The next morning was all silver light and soft air, the kind of weather that makes you linger over your tea. I took mine to the balcony, scarf draped loosely around my neck, and watched the boardwalk come to life. Shopkeepers lifting shutters, a cyclist weaving lazily between early walkers. I had no plans to call Nora, and no interest in waiting for her to call me. The weekend had shown me enough. If I left the door open, she would walk through without knocking. So today, I chose a door she didn't know. After breakfast, I packed a tote, water bottle, notebook, a peach I'd saved from the market, and set off toward the harbor. The path there ran along a row of weathered houses, each with a porch that looked like it had heard every kind of story. The harbor itself was busy. Fishermen unloading their catch, gulls circling and crying, the air thick with salt and diesel. I found a bench near the edge where the boats swayed. The sound of their masts knocking softly in the wind was oddly calming. I opened my notebook and began a list titled, "What I Keep." The first entries came quickly. My own schedule. My voice, unraised but heard. The right to leave a place before I am worn out in it. By midday, I'd eaten the peach and walked to a small cafe tucked between 2 bait shops. The waitress, a woman with a braid down her back, poured coffee without asking for my order. "You look like you need it," she said, smiling. I liked her for that. Back at the apartment, there was no new note under the seashell, no sign they'd returned. Instead, my phone held a single voicemail from Owen. His voice was flat, measured. "We can't keep going like this. Nora's upset. Call us tonight." The directive tone was there again, as if I'd signed a contract he was holding me to. I deleted it without listening twice. In the afternoon, May called. "They asked me if you're avoiding them," she said. "I told them you're just living your life." That shut them up for a moment. I laughed. "You're braver than you think, May." She sighed. "They'll spin it how they want. but at least you're not letting them write the ending. Later, I walked to the pier, the tide low enough to show dark rocks slick with seaweed. Kids were leaning over the railing, dropping lines with small hooks into the water. One boy pulled up a crab and let it scuttle back into the bucket with a click of claws. I stayed until the sky began to change, first pale orange, then deepening into rose. When I returned to the apartment, I cooked a simple supper: scrambled eggs with the last of the market carrots, bread warmed in the oven. The daisies were nearly done now, a few petals scattered on the table. I left them. Their time had been enough. Before bed, I wrote one line in my notebook: "Sometimes love is not in the holding on, but in the letting be." I slid the notebook back into the tote, draped the scarf over the chair, and left the balcony door cracked for the night air. The ocean's rhythm was steady, patient, as if reminding me that it could wait longer than any person could. Tomorrow, I decided, I'd take the long bus ride to the next town up the coast. Somewhere new, somewhere they wouldn't think to look for me, even if they tried. The bus to the next town up the coast was nearly empty, just me, a man with a guitar case, and two women speaking softly in Spanish. The route wound along cliffs where the sea hit the rocks in slow, powerful bursts. Every few miles, the road dipped into a cluster of houses, then rose again into open sky. I'd chosen this trip partly for the view, partly for the distance. The farther I went, the more I felt the tether between me and their expectations thin. I had no desire to cut it with drama. I just wanted it slack enough that I could move freely. The town was smaller than I'd imagined. One main street, a handful of shops, and a cafe that smelled of cinnamon and coffee. I went in, ordered a latte, and sat near the window. The counter was run by a woman in her 60s with bright, sharp eyes. "You're not from here," she said, as she set my drink down. "No," I replied. "Just visiting." She nodded, like that was the only answer needed. Afterward, I walked the length of the beach. It was quieter than my town, the sand almost white, the wind carrying a clean, mineral scent. I stopped to watch a man repairing his fishing nets, his hands quick despite their age. He didn't look up, but I sensed he knew I was there. Some silences are companionable like that. At a small bookstore near the end of the street, I found a used copy of a poetry collection Frank once read aloud to me. The pages were yellowed, the spine loose. I bought it for $2 and slid it into my tote. By mid-afternoon, I was back on the bus, the seat warm from the sun. My phone buzzed once. May again. "They're still talking about this weekend," she said when I answered. "Now Owen's saying you're being stubborn just to make a point." I smiled to myself. If I am, it's not the point he thinks. She laughed softly. "I told him you're busy, which you are." When I returned to the apartment, the sky was already turning the color of steel. No messages, no notes, no signs they'd been by again. I put the poetry book on the table next to the seashell, replacing the daisies I'd finally thrown away that morning. The table felt lighter without their drooping weight. I made a small dinner, bread, cheese, a sliced apple, and ate it on the balcony, the scarf around my shoulders against the breeze. Somewhere down the coast, I could just see the lights of the town I'd visited. The distance between here and there seemed the right size. Before bed, I read a few poems aloud to myself, the words filling the small space with a quiet that felt earned. One line caught in my chest. "The shore does not follow the tide, yet it is shaped by it." I thought about that as I turned off the light. The weekend had passed without me being where they wanted me. Soon I'd go home, but not to the same position I'd held before. That chair was already taken by someone I no longer was, and I had no plans to sit in it again. I woke to a sky so pale it seemed the ocean had drained into it overnight. The air was cool, edged with that faint metallic scent that comes before rain. My tea steamed against the chill as I sat on the balcony, scarf around my shoulders, notebook open on my lap. I wrote without thinking. Lists, fragments, stray thoughts that had no need to be polished. The past week had been a kind of rehearsal, I realized, not for confrontation, but for living outside the reach of someone else's schedule. I'd been testing the edges of my own company and finding they held. After breakfast, I walked the boardwalk one last time before heading home tomorrow. Shops were opening, the scent of coffee and fried dough curling out into the cool air. A boy rode past on a bike with a loaf of bread balanced in his basket, calling hello to people he knew. I envied that ease of belonging without the burden of expectation. Mid-morning, May called. "They want to know your travel plans," she said. I could hear the protective lilt in her voice. "I told them you'd be in touch when you were ready." I smiled into the phone. "You've been a better shield than I deserve." "You deserve it," she said simply. I spent the rest of the morning packing slowly, folding dresses, rolling the scarf, tucking the poetry book into my bag. The seashell from the boy on the boardwalk went into the side pocket, the one I'd reach for when I needed to remember that kindness can arrive without conditions. At noon, I took the bus to the harbor one last time. The tide was low, revealing dark rocks and tide pools slick with green. Children crouched over them, pointing at crabs and anemones. I sat on the bench where I'd written my list of what I keep and added one more line: the right to walk away without explaining twice. Back at the apartment in the late afternoon, I found a single text from Nora. "Can we meet when you're back? Please." The please landed differently this time. Not a demand wrapped in politeness, but something closer to an opening. Still, I didn't answer. Not yet. I made a final dinner from what was left. Eggs scrambled with the last slice of bread toasted alongside. A drizzle of the local honey I'd bought at the market. I ate with the balcony door open, letting the sound of the waves be the room's only conversation. As the sun went down, I walked to the pier. The sky was layered, peach near the horizon, fading into lavender, then deepening into blue. Couples leaned against the railing, watching the water shift in the fading light. I stood alone, and it didn't feel like lacking. On the way back, I passed a family gathered around a street musician. The grandmother clapped along to the rhythm, the others smiling with her. I wondered if she'd fought her own battles for respect, or if she'd been allowed her place without protest. At the apartment, I washed the dishes, wiped the counters, and placed the folded note from Nora under the seashell again. Tomorrow, I'd return to my own home. I knew they'd want answers. About the airport, about the letter, about why I'd chosen to spend my time here instead of with them. And I knew I'd give only the answers I wanted to. Before bed, I wrote one last page in my notebook here. I am not the sum of my invitations. I am not diminished by the rooms I am absent from. My worth is not counted in the number of seats set for me at someone else's table. I left the balcony door open a crack for the night air. The ocean's steady breathing felt like a promise, one I'd made to myself, and one I intended to keep. Tomorrow, I'd carry it home, not as proof to anyone else, but as a compass for the days ahead. The morning I left, the ocean was restless, its waves folding into each other with a quiet urgency. I stood on the balcony one last time, scarf around my neck, tea warm in my hands. The apartment was nearly bare now, my suitcase packed, the vase empty, the chair by the sliding door holding only the folded throw. I locked the door and left the key in the lockbox, pausing for a moment on the boardwalk. The shops were still closed, their awnings rolled down like eyelids. A gull called overhead, sharp and brief. I walked to the bus stop without hurry. The ride inland toward the station felt longer than the day I'd arrived. Maybe because I knew what I was going back to. Calls, questions, and the subtle pull to step back into an old role. But my time here had shifted something. I wasn't going home as the woman who'd stood at the airport gate, envelope in hand, hoping they might turn and see her. At the station, I bought a coffee and sat by the window until my train was called. Across the platform, a man helped his elderly mother with her bag, her hand resting lightly on his arm. They didn't speak, but the care was plain. Not all families need words to make room for each other. The train rolled out on time, the coast slipping away into fields and low hills. I opened my notebook, reading the pages I'd written here. Lists of what I kept, small fragments of thought, the single poem line about the shore and the tide. All of it felt like evidence, not for them, but for me, that I'd stepped out of their frame and was still in focus. By early afternoon, I was home. The air inside the house smelled faintly stale, but it was mine. My plants had survived, leaning toward the window as if they'd been waiting. I set my suitcase in the hallway, made tea, and sat at my own kitchen table. The seashell went on the windowsill. The phone rang within the hour. Nora. I let it go to voicemail. Then Luke called. I answered. "Grandma, you're home." His voice had that unguarded warmth I never wanted to lose. "I am," I said. "We'll see each other soon." He hesitated. "Mom wants to come over." I smiled into the silence. "We'll plan it, Luke, on a day that works for both of us." By evening, there were 3 messages from Nora. 2 asking when we could meet. 1 saying, "We can't avoid this conversation forever." I read them all, then set the phone down without replying. Some things weren't ready yet, not because I feared them, but because I didn't intend to have them on someone else's clock. I made a simple dinner, the first in my own kitchen in weeks. Pasta with olive oil, garlic, and the last of the bread from my trip. As I ate, I realized the house felt different. Not quieter, exactly, but more mine. The absence of certain voices was not a hollow space anymore. It was a room I could fill deliberately. Later, I took the notebook to my chair by the window and wrote, "The airport was not the point. The letter was not the point. The point was to stand in a place they had closed to me and know I could walk away with my dignity intact. I did that, and I will keep doing it." The sky outside darkened into a deep, soft blue. I thought about the ocean, about the painted chair facing the horizon, about the boy handing me the seashell. Pieces of the trip I could carry without their permission. When I turned off the light, the house didn't feel empty. It felt steady. And so did I. The next conversation would come when I was ready. And when it did, I'd be the one choosing where we sat, how long we stayed, and when I got up to leave.